This is Dorie Clark, and I am here with Robert Reffkin. He is the CEO of Compass, and he is the author of the new book, No One Succeeds Alone. We are going to be talking today about building a network for success, and you are here with Newsweek for our weekly show, Better. Robert, it's fantastic to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. So, Robert, you as a CEO, you have now written a book about the power of networking and the power of relationships. And one of the interesting aspects of your story is that you did not necessarily start out in the place that many CEOs did. You had a single mom raising you, and I'm actually curious. How did you even? There are so many people out there that hate networking. They recoil at the term and much less the concept, which often involves building strategic relationships. How did you even figure out that this was an important thing to do or something that you wanted to spend your time doing?
So my mom, like you mentioned, was a single mom, and she was actually disowned by her parents for an interracial relationship. And she had to figure everything out by herself. One thing that she did really well is she placed me in 7 different nonprofits as a kid. And what I realized is all these nonprofits had board members that wanted to help. They had employees and staff that wanted to help. And then there was a community of people that were all positive together. And there were my peers that we were all helping each other. And so I think at an early age, I felt that every interaction could be an opportunity, and that people, by talking to them, you can do great things because they wanted to give you advice. And also, because I never had a father, I always wanted one. So a lot of these relationships with my mentors early on, they're very personal, and those relationships turned into people wanting to help me, not just with advice, but in more active ways as well.
That's really interesting, Robert. Thank you so much. And thank you, by the way, to the folks who are tuning in. Please type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you're calling in from. We would love to be able to say hi. Again, I'm here with Robert Reffkin, the CEO of Compass and the author of the new book, No One Succeeds Alone. So, Robert, when it comes to people who might be watching this, who do have that kind of discomfort or even revulsion at the concept of networking, what is your advice to them if someone says, oh, this is so not my thing, I hate it, I'm a lone wolf? How would you counsel someone to perhaps get over that? Or is it strictly necessary? What's your take?
Well, networking doesn't have to be going to an event and shaking a bunch of hands and trying to spark a conversation with everyone and trying to be more interesting than you are. It can be really authentic and really personal. So just find somebody who you respect. It could be a peer or someone who's 5, 10 years above you or more, and just reach out to them and say, hey, can we get on the phone? Can we have a cup of coffee? Can I, take you out to a breakfast? And just share, who you are, what you're trying to achieve, ask for advice, and have a real, sincere, genuine conversation. What I would suggest, what would surprise me as I developed so many mentors, and I've probably had more mentors, at least than anyone that I've ever known. I've been very, very fortunate that way, is that people actually want to talk about the personal stuff as much, if not much more, than the business stuff. So it doesn't have to be like a bunch of questions about business or just getting your goals. It could be, how do you know when it's time to get married? You have 3 kids. How do you ground them and make sure they're grounded and that they're hungry? My kids are starting to play video games every day. Did you have that issue? How do you deal with it? Right. So I think having very genuine conversations one-on-one that are meaningful and building real relationships is very strong networking. It doesn't have to be this big room stuff.
That's really interesting and really powerful, Robert. Thank you. We just want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in here. Veronica's here, Anna from Vancouver, Fabio from Sao Paulo, Rosinda from Mexico, Patricia from Heidelberg, Charlotte's here from Oklahoma, Kristen from Dallas, Minx from Oakland, Stacy from St. Petersburg. We have Peter from Michigan, Samir is here. All kinds of amazing folks. We're glad you're tuning in, and please type into the chat box your question for the CEO of Compass Real Estate, Robert Reffkin, and the author of the new book, No One Succeeds Alone. Now, Robert, one of the distinguishing things about the relationships that you've built is, first of all, you mentioned you have a lot of mentors, which is great, and I think rare for a lot of professionals who maybe struggle to figure out how to cultivate mentor relationships. But it's not just random mentors. You actually have been mentored by some of the leading lights, some of the most successful people in the corporate world. How have you developed or been able to develop relationships with people that are famous enough and successful enough that probably most people would say, oh, they're inaccessible. There's just no way that I could build a relationship with that CEO or with that leader. How did you go about that?
Look, I think it's important to recognize that everyone wants to feel meaningful, right? No matter how successful a CEO is, they want to feel like their life is of meaning, and they want to feel a part of a community. And so, with that, if you want to develop a relationship with someone that you think is not accessible, I would suggest a couple things. One, help them realize that you are a good person. That by helping you, that it will have an exponential impact because you're going to help others, whether it's your family, whether it's your community, because people want to have as much impact as possible. Two, I would do what you say you're going to do. It is shocking how many people just in life just don't do what they say they're going to do. And so an example could be ask for advice, then send them a handwritten thank you note a month later about how you use that advice and what happened. And then they're going to say, okay, this person's a good use of my time. And lastly, I would say, try to give them something of value, right? So a test that you should use after every conversation, do you think you told them something that they're going to go home and tell their family about, or that they're going to tell one of their colleagues about? I'll give an example. You could say, hey, let's say you're in business school. Hey, in business school right now, there's a big shift. People used to want to go into finance. Now they all want to go and work for Google. Or people used to want to work for Google, but now they all want to work for startups. It's been a really big shift, and here's why. That's something they would go home or they tell their family about. Oh yeah, things are changing right now. And so those are three things I think can be helpful.
Really interesting, Robert. Thank you very much. And a question came in that I think is probably, it's a great one. I think it's on the minds of a lot of people. I'm curious your thoughts. One LinkedIn user says, I'm curious how you handle conflicting advice. What if you ask a couple of mentors and they literally tell you opposite things? How would you thread that needle?
Yeah, that definitely happens. And that definitely happens. But it's the minority of the time. Look, when people give me conflicting advice, which happens more, I think the advice becomes more conflicting, I think, as you progress in your career versus early on. Like early on, go to school, go to college, get good grades, that kind of stuff. What I try to do, I have a principle in the book called learn from reality. The spirit behind it is the greatest advantage you're going to have in life is the speed at which you learn. So you have to learn fast. One of the benefits of mentors is you can learn off of their experiences. But you can also look to your left and to your right and see what are the best people doing or the best companies doing. And so if I get conflicting advice, I try to see how does that compare to the market of talent, right? The people that have the most options that can do the best things. Are they going the direction of one person's advice or another? And I tend to go with where the market's going.
Really interesting point. Thank you for that. And again, if you're just tuning in, we have a weekly Newsweek interview show called Better, and you are watching it. It is every Thursday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 5 o'clock in London. Next week, we're interviewing the well-known organizational psychologist Robert Cialdini author of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode, go to dorieclark.com/LinkedIn, and you can sign up for my LinkedIn newsletter to get updates and reminders and make sure you're a part of all of this. If you want to learn more about Robert Reffkin and his company, you can go to compass.com. He is the CEO of Compass. And Robert, a question that I have, I remember, and I mentioned this to you at the beginning of the call. So we first met, or I like for 2 seconds, probably a decade ago at a Renaissance Weekend conference. And I remember even at the time, you were really, I think, on a trajectory of success. And I remember you mentioning at the time, and it kind of ties into what you were just mentioning, that you were very keenly attuned to understanding and almost reverse engineering the success of people you admired. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and how you think about that in sculpting your career.
Yeah. Yeah. So it all goes back to learn from reality. But I think a lot of people have a hard time not making things up. Like there's an instinct in, I think, in maybe just humanity to create and to change and to be the first, maybe, but I actually I just saw the answers everywhere around me. That's how I've approached, like when I look out at the world, like, there's Matrix and they see all the numbers. Yeah, I just see answers. The answers are everywhere. And so one of the ways to reverse engineer is I got the bios. I call it a virtual mentor. So you can get a mentor like real, one-on-one, or you can just get it virtually. And you can get the bios of all the people you respect. You can get bios of people from Henry Crown Fellows and Aspen Institute or World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders, White House Fellows. Those were all young professionals on average, say around 40. And at the time, I was in my 20s when we met. And I put them in a long document. And I put in yellow all the things that I was kind of in the realm of being able to do, yellow highlight. And in pink, I put in all the things that I had never heard of that were like these great, really cool ideas. And I took all the yellows, all the pinks, put it into one bio, and I called it my aspirational bio. And there are so many interesting ideas of things that you can do from it. Renaissance Weekend, that's how I found Renaissance Weekend, because it was in someone's bio. How would I know about it, right? That's how I found things like French American Foundation and Asia Society and all these things with these young professional groups. I ran 50 marathons, one in each state in my 20s to raise $1 million for nonprofits. There's 7 nonprofits I went through as a student, plus a nonprofit I founded called America Needs You. And I did it again to raise $1 million, but the problem I had at the time is, how am I going to raise the money? And so in these bios, I saw some person climb Mount McKinley to raise $1 million for AIDS research. Someone else ran a marathon in all 50 states, and somebody else rode a bike cross country with his mom. And I said, wow, I could do all those 3 things in one. I'll run a marathon, one in each U.S. state. My mom will join each one, and I'll raise $1 million as part of that effort to for these organizations that helped me when I was younger, and America Needs You. And so that's an example of how I did that.
I think that's phenomenal, Robert. I love that. And in fact, it ties in. A couple of weeks ago on this show, I interviewed William Green, who's a financial journalist and the author of a new book called Richer, Wiser, Happier, where he's analyzing the investing strategies of the world's greatest investors and applying them to life. And he did a profile of a gentleman named Monish Pabrai, who has succeeded wildly as an investor, literally through a strategy he calls cloning, where he basically looks at what Warren Buffett and other great investors have done. And he says, similar to your point, too many people are concerned with being an original. If you are copying people who are doing it right that you respect, that can be really powerful. So I love what you're saying. A great question, Robert, came in from Veronica. She's curious, what advice do you have for networking as one would look to change careers? Do you have thoughts or advice for someone in that position?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about changing careers, yeah, I would. It's obviously a big decision. I would definitely find people that are in the career that you hope to go into, and I would ask them for their advice. And I probably do that with a couple people, not just one. Um, and I try to find people that went from your career to that career because they're moving careers can mean a lot or require many different things based off of where you're coming from. And so that would be my advice: find as many people that have done exactly what you want to do, and ask them how did they do it and what to watch out for.
Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense. Very helpful. Thank you. And another question that came in that I think is quite interesting. As someone who has worked with a lot of mentors and had a lot of mentor relationships, Josephine was curious. She said, "Have you ever had a situation where some of your role models have let you down in some way, and therefore having to reevaluate what or who you consider a role model?" What's your thought about that? Have you been through that experience, Robert, or do you have thoughts or guidance about that?
Yeah, so absolutely, it's happened, and like you just got to move on. I think the if there's like three things that are required for both happiness and a successful life, is just being able to be positive, being able to just move forward. Whether a mentor lets you down, or any challenge happens, you fall down. How do you bounce back and bounce back with passion? And it's gonna happen. But I would try to think about it as little as possible, and also, I mean, it's almost worth asking yourself at the end of each day, how much of that day, percentage wise, did I think about positive things, and did I have a growth mindset and abundance mindset versus think about what could go wrong, what isn't working, and so think about all the wonderful mentors you do have, and just focus on them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It certainly would be easy to get into a bit of a spiral, and that is often not productive in the end. So,
Yeah.
so thank you for that.
You don't want to hold a grudge. Holding a grudge hurts you, not them. And so just you keep that positive mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Robert, a question that I often hear from people, let's say they've bought into the concept that yes, networking is important, relationships are important. They sometimes get stuck at the how, and often they're wondering, like, like, how do you know who you should keep in touch with? Is there a technology? Is there some kind of software you should use? How do you keep track of all of the connections that theoretically you should be maintaining? What is your advice for folks, and what do you do personally to keep in touch with your most important relationships?
Yeah, so I think it's worth separating relationships for business versus ones that are more like mentorship and personal relationships. If it's your business, at Compass we serve over 20,000 real estate agents. They're all entrepreneurs, the largest industry of entrepreneurs in the country, 2 million strong, largest industry dominated by women, and an industry that pushes people in their 50s and 60s and 70s to get better, not out of the door. It's an amazing industry of people that build their businesses off of their sphere of influence. Everyone who buys or sells, it's disproportionately just the people that are in their sphere, so they have to stay in touch with them. And so we give them a CRM, a customer relationship management tool, to help them stay in touch. And so from a business standpoint, if your business requires you to stay in touch with a lot of people that you want to use you again, and work with you again in the future, I think a CRM is a very important. It's almost irresponsible not to have a CRM. And then on the other extreme, if it's about personal, meaningful, one-on-one mentorship relationships, sponsors, and the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is a mentor gives advice. A sponsor is someone who uses their social and political capital to help you. If you want something on that other end of the spectrum, yeah, I think it's about you being somebody that makes their life more meaningful. And again, what makes their life more meaningful is can you do things that show them that when they give you advice, you take it and it actually helped you. And if you do that again and again over many times, they're going to almost think that they made your success, right? That the real measure of did you do your job as a mentee does the mentor feel like they've almost made you because they've given you so much advice that you've taken that has helped you be successful, that they have ownership in your success. They're invested in your success. And then, consistent with that, as mentioned before, just do what you say you're going to do. Follow up. Handwritten notes. I used to work at Lazard for the late Vernon Jordan. And I met with him my first time, wrote him an email, thank you for meeting with me. And his assistant calls me up and says, hey, you shouldn't send Mr. Jordan an email. You should write a handwritten note. She takes me to the bottom of Rockefeller Center. There's a Crane's envelope store. And I bought, at the time it was only 10, handwritten note, cards, and I wrote a handwritten note. Then I started sending to other people, and they all appreciated it so much. In a world of technology, the handwritten note stands out even more. And it's not just like you're saying thank you. It's like, oh, this is a person who goes the distance. This is a person that will go above and beyond. And I think it was being the kind of person who goes above and beyond, that follows up, that does what they say they're going to do, which made it easier for me to raise money when I founded Compass 8.5 years ago, because people said, okay, this is an entrepreneur that, he says he has a big dream and he's going to go for it and do what he says he's going to do.
Super interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Robert. Again, you are watching Newsweek's show Better. If you want to make sure you never miss one, go to DorieClark.com. You can sign up to receive a free self-assessment, and you can thereby join my email list so you'll get regular reminders about these conversations. And if you'd like to learn more about Robert and his new book, you can go to NoOneSucceedsAloneBook.com. So we have time, Robert, for just a couple more questions. We're going to be ending at 12:25 today. And a great question came in that I think a lot of people can relate to from Hillary. She wants to know, you often hear advice from people in the networking sphere that you should be reaching out and offering to be of service to others. Should we in fact be doing this? And if we do, how can we avoid getting in over our heads and having to be of service so much that we're not able to actually really do it well or be able to do our own jobs?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of cliches in life, right? But one is you can't spread yourself thin, right? There's only so much time in a day. And it's really hard. Like I went through periods of, when I started my careers at McKinsey, and then I worked at Lazard, I was a White House fellow, worked at Goldman Sachs. And to be perfectly frank, I wasn't successful at those places. I didn't get invited to return to McKinsey after being an analyst, as an example. And one of the reasons why is I was spreading myself too thin. I was trying to do too much. I was on nonprofit boards, and I founded a nonprofit during that time, and I was founding chair of a charter school. I was running the marathons. I mean, literally every month over the course of those years, and it made it hard to be as successful in my day job. And I think you have to. The main thing has to be keeping the main thing. And you have to, one thing that helped me, because I want to be of service. It feels better giving than getting, right? At least for me. And I want to be part of a bigger community. I want to give back. Hearing, there's certain people like Warren Buffett who will say, look, that at least his approach, and there's no one size fits all approach, but his approach is to be as successful as he can, and then over time just give it all back at once when he passes away. I think there's something to that, which is, by being successful and focused in your day job, will that allow you to be of more service over time? And look, I don't think everyone has to wait until they're on their deathbed, but particularly earlier in your career, to build that strong foundation is super important.
That's fantastic. Robert Reffkin, closing word. We're so glad to have you here. This is Robert Reffkin. He's the author of the new book, No One Succeeds Alone. If you could give listeners one piece of advice, if people want to take action today to improve their relationships overall, what would you encourage people to do?
Yeah, look, my suggestion, if you want to improve your relationships, is to be your authentic self. Know that you are great just as you are. and that interacting with people that are genuine, that are sincere, that are real. It is an amazing thing for everyone that you'll interact with, and that you don't have to pretend to be anyone else. You are great who you are. Your uniqueness is special, and just have that confidence in you that you don't have to change to be like anybody else.
Excellent advice. Robert Reffkin, author of No One Succeeds Alone. Thank you, Robert, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you next Thursday.
Thank you so much.